Welcome to Heber Valley Life Podcast. I'm Rachel Kahler, Executive Director of the Community Alliance for Main Street. And today we're talking government, leadership, and building bridges that are sometimes feel like the divide is too great. Today, my guest is Kelsey Berg. She has one of the most interesting resumes in Utah's public affairs. From working in Congress, managing campaigns, and serving as the Deputy Chief of Staff for Senator Mitt Romney, working alongside Congressman Jason Chaffetz, she has advocated for rural communities and has led government relations for one of Utah's largest companies, the Larry H. Miller Company. Now helping bring the 2034 Olympic and Paralympic Winter Games to Utah, she's had a front row seat to government, politics, and public policy. After 13 years navigating political landmines, we're excited to hear her perspective on where our country is headed and how communities like Heber Valley fit into that future. Kelsey, welcome to Heber Valley Life.
Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
So tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I grew up in Wasatch County, born and raised. Family's been here a long time. I graduated from BYU in political science, which I didn't really know where it would lead, and it's been a dream come true from a career perspective. And so, yeah, love Wasatch County. I love the state of Utah, and happy to have been able to be in public service as long as I have.
When you started at BYU and selected political science, I feel like a lot of people go into political science because they either like to argue or they're upset at the government. So where did you fall?
My actually first semester at BYU was pre-nursing, but I didn't think I was smart enough to get into the BYU nursing program, nor did I have the patience to do kind of CNA stuff before. And I had a mentor who said, just take something that makes you want to go to class because your undergrad doesn't really matter. And I had been, quietly interested in politics, even though I didn't think about it. My parents are both not really politically active, but community active. Mom was in PTA. Dad sat on a number of boards across the county. And in my junior year of high school, right, Mr. Wheatley's class, you have to go to a government meeting. At the time, the school board was talking about the new high school. And I intended to live back in the county, and I love my heritage here. And so I went to every school board meeting the last year and a half of high school. Super nerd. They even gave me a plaque, student school board member, super nerdy. But anyway, and so when I was at BYU, that was Mitt Romney's first run for president. And so, of course, it was all the talk. And so it was something that happened to interest me. I had no clue where it would lead or what would end up happening. And I got lucky and met some folks up at the legislature and interned for lobbyists, ran a couple campaigns, and then worked for Jason Chaffetz right out of college, right out of BYU, and went to DC, and the rest is history. So super lucky. But yeah, I guess just kind of fell into enjoying policy and figuring out how to try and help people, especially when it comes to the government.
You know, you mentioned Mitt Romney, and I was going to school in New Hampshire, senior in college, and there was a debate between he and Senator Kennedy in the downtown Boston. And I went down, and I remember, cheering for him. And ultimately, he did not get that appointment and continued to serve as governor of this great state of Massachusetts. But it's interesting how those experiences really do shape us. Mm-hmm. Your experience at school board meetings, and I think it's interesting with public policy, especially because it's right there in front of us. We see it happening in our day-to-day, whether at the local level. The federal level, to me, feels more untouchable, and yet people get so upset about some of the things that are happening in DC. And so I'm so curious. You had an opportunity to live in DC, working with both Jason Chaffetz and Mitt Romney. What are some things at the federal level that people would be surprised?
I think that it's how the camaraderie between members in DC is, especially of the opposite political parties, is a thing. They obviously play for the cameras, which is unfortunate in some cases, and that's what they think their constituents want. But they really do get along, and I wish there was more of that. We saw more of that today. But the other thing is, I think people, and in some cases they are untouchable. The problem is the federal government's so large and so many decisions are made by bureaucrats, where there are opportunities to get to know your member of Congress or your senator. I mean, they are accessible if you're willing to show up to meetings and be a normal person, even if you disagree with them. And that's the other thing too is because I don't think disagreements are a problem. It's just how do you handle them, and that's one of the concerns I see today is everything just becomes personal so easy, and that's not the case. There's everyone, especially if you're in public service and you understand this, you do it because you care, not because it's a way to got some money or you become famous. Like it is not enjoyable to be in the public eye and to have the feeling of, okay, as a staffer, it was my salary's paid for by the taxpayers. Like I can't take a day off because they're paying me. And so there's never time for vacation. You always feel like you have to be working and getting involved and knowing what's going on so you can best represent your constituents. And so that's what I wish, I guess, people, like they are actual people. They do have families. They do care about the future. You might disagree with what their view of the future looks like, but for the vast majority of them, they're good, decent people that are just trying to make a difference.
You had an interesting kind of responsibility with energy and resources. And I think because of that, you became very interested in making sure that you had your ear on the ground here in Utah. And 29 counties, every county commissioner, you spent a lot of time on the road understanding issues. And obviously, rural communities is kind of where your heart is. Talk to me about why it was important to you to travel and understand the issues that were happening here in Utah.
Well, one, it's because our job to represent them. And so I wanted to understand. But two, I think particularly in rural areas, and this isn't, I don't want to talk in stereotypes or over generalities, but in most case, they don't sweat the small stuff, which I appreciate. I think there's a good worldview and life view in that. But two, they're the ones, especially in Utah, where 67% of our state is public lands. And so much of their livelihoods are determined by how you can use those lands. And so many decisions would be made on the other side of the country in DC, and they wouldn't have any say or any real involvement. And people respond very differently when they feel like something is being done to them as opposed to being done with them. And for folks that don't live in Utah and don't have, some of the heritage and the multi-generational, ranching responsibilities and the family status of not being the weak link of breaking that. For those people that come in and tell, Utahns that they don't care about the land as much as they do is really quite offensive. And so trying to go to them and say, no, people do listen to you. It does matter. Please stay involved and try to make some of those changes was really important to me to be able to have people have that voice. And I didn't feel like I could effectively represent them if I hadn't gone and listened to them, because the last thing I want to do is be able to go say, this is what I think you want. Because in most cases it wasn't. And that was no different. Even if they agreed with me, then someone from the East Coast coming in and saying, oh, we know what's best for you. And they're, they've taken care of this land for, 100 plus years, 150 years. And that's the reason people still want to come visit and tour. And so tried to give them a voice.
I just keep thinking of like Delta with the coal mine and the shift that they were kind of required to do the natural gas plant, the power plant. I think of Richfield and the issues that they've had down there. Are there specific stories that really stand out in your experience that where you were able to go in, either explain what DC was trying to do or explain what Utah wanted and were able to make a change to a policy?
Yeah. One of the things I'm most proud of that actually, there was a signing at the state capitol, it was last week, on the Santa Fe swell is, so obviously public lands have a very tumultuous history in Utah, way back from the Grand Staircase designation where Bill Clinton did it from Arizona. And once that happened, Emory County, for example, came and said there was a list that had been leaked about the same time that Santa Fe swell was also on the monument list. So Emory County got together almost 30 years ago now, and they put together what's called the Public Lands Council and said, okay, we don't want this to happen. So how do we, get together with the environmental community and the people that are pushing this and figure out what boundaries work or, try and come to the table. And so they worked on it for 25 years, just the citizens getting together, working with the county commission, everything else. When I worked for Jason Chaffetz, Rob Bishop, who was the chairman of Natural Resources at the time, had the idea to try and do kind of a settlement across also, lots of counties in southern Utah, because there's some environmental groups that pretty much want to make half the state big W wilderness, which means no roads, no mechanized, no bikes, no, anything, which would essentially just lock out a bunch of people's access. And so Rob Bishop started working on the Public Lands Initiative, and there were some good things that came out of it. I think it ended up falling under its own weight. Each county and the dynamics there is very different across the southern part of what they want, and the landscape's just so different. So Emory County is part of that. They waited, and then eventually when that fell apart, the promise was that Emory County would get their day in the sun, and that there would be a bill specifically for Emory County. And so our first year, so I got to work on that when I worked for Congressman Chaffetz, and then in 2019, I carried that on when I worked with Senator Romney, and that was one of the first bills that we got across the finish line. And that essentially creates the San Rafael Swell has wilderness where there should have wilderness, and has a recreation in the middle. We actually created a national monument. It's called the Jurassic National Monument. It's the Cleveland Lode Dinosaur Quarry down in Emory County, which is the largest concentration of Jurassic era dinosaur bones in the world, which is a pretty remarkable place. Has not been studied to its full potential, but that to me was the perfect example of, again, we created Big W wilderness, which most people would say is impossible to have any sort of local buy-in, because again, it's for some people's views, it locks up land. We had some mining leases that were released, so that, again, in Emory County, where they're very proud of their ability to provide power as coal miners, there were some opportunities there. We created a national monument, which no one thought was possible. And so that's just one where you finally got everyone at the table. They were all interested in getting to a resolution and getting to kind of a guarantee of where the lines were and where decisions could be made. And so that's one that I'm proud of. And there was a recreation management signing for part of the swell last week between the state and the BLM. So that has proceeded to have some dividends. So pretty excited about that one.
I just keep thinking, why does it take so long? Is it just the political willpower? Is it just trying to get the right people at the table? Why is it so slow to get some of these good things enacted?
I mean, that's kind of the way the process was set up. The process was set up from the founders with the friction, right? That's why you have the three co-equal branches of government. So why even within the legislative branch, you have two very different bodies that have two different, constituencies and responsibilities. I mean, you think back, the Senate was originally picked by state legislators, right? Where the House was supposed to be representative of the public. And that's why they've got 2-year terms. That's why they're 6 year in the Senate. Like, there was supposed to be this friction. And you said at the beginning, is most people look to the federal government where their daily lives are affected by the people the closest to them, their city councils, their counties, their school districts, their, state legislators. But how many people can tell you who their city councilor is, right? Or who's their representative on the school board? And here locally, to talk about property taxes. Well, if you look at your property tax, the school board is one of the biggest portions. And how many people, pay attention to that or actually get involved in that? And so that's kind of been a frustrating thing on my side is when you look and you see it. And again, you want people to be engaged. You want them to know who the president is, but the president does not affect your daily life. And so you want people to get closer to where it is when you can have those conversations. But people just don't seem to be as interested in that. So,
well, and let's go there, because it feels like America right now feels so politically divided, and yet this has been an ongoing division. It isn't just now. I think social media and the media kind of blows it up, and there's more access to more information. There's more opportunities to speak your mind. And do you feel like, based on your experience both in DC and here at the state, it's any different than it was, say, 50 years ago?
No, well, that's also based on reading lots of books. There's an interesting book that just came out called The Age of Acrimony, which is right after the Civil War and kind of how that progressed. And eventually the younger generation just kind of were tired of the acrimony, right? Of the friction and the fighting. I guess not friction. I think friction's a good thing, but of kind of some of the vitriol. I mean, it was when people would go to vote, it was, public votes, and you could get attacked and everything else. So I think our country's been here before. I do think there's benefits of social media being able to go directly to people, but on the flip side, there is such a lack of literacy when it comes to social media too, that we forget that our adversaries around the world are also trying to sow seeds of hate and discontent. And so when there's a lot more ability for people to share truth, but there's also a lot more ability for people to share, distruth and misinformation and a little bit of truth and a whole bunch of untruths. And that seems to spread faster than the actual truth. And I think because of that as well, people are less likely to admit that they were wrong because now they're on the record about something. And so they kind of are forced to more dig in, and you feel the tribalism, and it's easier to feel like everyone agrees with you in your echo chamber. If you're, that's what's curated for you on your social media. And so again, there's pros and cons. But again, it is really interesting to me that people let someone they don't know say something on social media, and then that's what affects them or causes them to get so riled up. And I mean, Facebook, you look at a profile, and if they have a picture of a cat and they have 0 friends, they're probably not a real person. Or if it's on, Twitter and someone says something super outrageous, like we know for a fact that our adversaries in China and Russia and some of the other countries have these bots that their job is just to go out and sow misinformation and to get Americans all riled up. And we let them so easy. We just fall into the traps, and that's the frustrating part. And that's where, again, as good as the transparency is, I wish people would be willing to show up more in the right mindset to town halls or to community meetings and have those conversations. That's the other thing is I learned is elected officials are way more accessible than we think they are, especially here in the state of Utah. Like anyone can show up to the state capitol. Anyone can meet with their legislator. Like you can become friends with people super easy. I mean, our county council and city council and folks, like they live in our neighborhoods. You see them at the store. You see them at ball games. Like have normal conversations, become friends. You can still disagree, but you can still then understand where someone's coming from.
It makes me think Mitt Romney came to the library to talk about the airport. And I remember it was during the master plan for the airport. And one of the requests that we had was help us work with the Federal Aviation Committee better so that we can truly understand what their expectations were and what we needed to do to make sure that we were in compliance. And you were really instrumental in several of those meetings. And I think it was, for me, an opportunity to really work with the senator and understand that the FAA wasn't just, well, there were individuals that were kind of flexing, but there was also an opportunity to really understand what they needed out of us and also understand where the money was coming from. And I think that was a really important distinction as we started making important decisions for the future of the Heber City Municipal Airport, that it wasn't ever going to be commercial, and the FAA had no interest in it to become commercial. They don't want a tower there. They don't want commercial flights. But there is a requirement that there's a network of airports that people need to be able to fly in and out of. And that's a federal plan. That's a federal program that our little airport that has been so controversial in our community is part of. So it was interesting for me because it had really nothing to do with the state. There was no one at the state level. We truly needed Senator Romney to give us access to staffers to get the right meetings so that we could really lay out the cards and really understand that.
Yeah. Well, and I don't know. I mean, that's a very personal one too, because the planes fly over my house. And I want to keep it small too, but I think, so I don't know how much we actually like changed with that. Right. But I think, and you can, share your perspective on this, but I think the city felt heard.
Yeah.
And at least felt like, okay, at least someone listened. And that's kind of the hard part too, is I think, sometimes constituents think, oh, if I share my opinion and they don't change their mind, then they didn't listen. It's like, well, they still could listen, and you never know what other questions they could have had or thoughts they could have had, but at least they went through it. And just because you didn't change the outcome doesn't mean you weren't listened. And there could have been things. We started off talking about, some developments here in town, and there were some close to my family's house, and we worked really hard with the city council. And to stop it? No, but hopefully it's better, and there were some changes, and it's a better outcome at the beginning. And so that's, again, people respond very different if something happened with them than to them. I think that's where I wish, again, we had just more communication and conversations, because the FA is difficult. That's such a complicated thing. And even that one, United States Senator is not going to change the whole FAA model and how everything else works across the country. And but hopefully, again, folks felt listened to, and that they weren't alone and feeling like the federal government was, rolling over them.
No, and I think for me, it really was a better understanding of the reason why they were so interested in not an expansion of the airport, but a true upgrade for safety. We were no longer compliant. We were a B airport that needed to be at a C2 level, and what it would take financially to get there. And the FAA really do have the funds, and those are all collected through usage funds. It's no tax on the general population, but actually fees that are paid for by travelers using those airports. So for me, it was just such an eye opener to realize that we had something here that was important at a federal level, because we don't have federal national parks. We don't have a lot of federal land that's accessible. I mean, we do. We have the Forest Service that surrounds this county, but it's not like, we don't have a national park. We don't have a lot of these things that you see in Southern Utah that you talked about earlier that we're competing with. Okay, so I do want to talk about just social media in general, because you and I actually met through a lot of my postings of local events and especially city council meetings. And you often had a lot to say about the decisions we were making. And I found it interesting because sometimes you were in DC and reading my, kind of reviewing my notes, and would often give me pause because you would ask questions that I hadn't thought of before. So we've never talked about this, but I'm really curious, what was your perspective kind of seeing these local decisions being made that you maybe had a larger perspective on?
Well, first of all, I appreciate all of you do a fabulous job, which I wish more people did. Again, use social media for more transparency, to be able to share what goes on. And I think everyone gets so busy in their lives that everyone wishes they could be as involved as they want to be. And the other thing too is everyone thinks that lots of decisions are made before the discussions are made before the meeting is even happening, right? And that's what I try to share with folks. You got to stay involved from the beginning. But all politics is local. And again, I even though I was in DC and looking at things, I still, Wasatch County is my home. And hopefully will always be my home. I'm lucky enough to be able to have a home here now. And so again, it matters, and all those things matter, whether I was working for the federal government, which again was great and fine, but the likelihood of them passing something that ever affected me was minuscule. Whereas the stuff that you guys are doing on the city council, and I'm not even a Heber City resident, so only lived in the county, and so, but being able to again share thoughts and opinions.
I call them opinion bombs, and everyone has one. But the reality is sometimes it's really difficult to take the questions and comments, because you have 6 months of information that you've made a decision on, and it came down to that last meeting, trying to encompass a lot of those issues and even compromises that had to happen to get to that decision.
Yeah. Well, that's why and I don't know the right way to do it, but city council meetings or county council meetings, however you want to put it, are the worst place to have dialogue between elected officials and residents. They're just not set up to be that. And so I don't know, a better way to do it. But that's the problem. Is I think residents go and they think that that's where they're going to have a back and forth, and that's just not legally by law the way that public meetings are set up. That's not the place to have it. And then it's frustrating because the city and the county and, Midway and Charleston, they'll have, kind of some interlocal meetings where it is a little bit more for some of that dialogue, and yet no one shows up. And so, it's kind of frustrating. And I get where folks come from, from elected officials come from on that, because you try really hard to get people to show up and then they never do. And, I mean, that's what happened on the Heber County lands bill. I mean, they had 25 years of public meetings.
Hmm.
And then all of a sudden it happens, and then you get a room full of people that want to know, how this happened. It's like, where have you been? Like, I don't know how much more we could have put out more public meetings, and they've met on the same Tuesday every month for 25 years, and yet, even in a place like Heber County, folks are still surprised.
So how can local leaders navigate controversial issues? Have you found something that worked?
I think you see this a lot more these days is where people just want authenticity, right? I mean, be honest about if there's something you change your mind on, if your hands are tied, right? Like just share the process with people and bring them along a little bit more on the journey. And I think that's where people, again, I hope people come to that with a little more of an open mind and an understanding of what, rather than saying, well, I do something differently in my position. But it's interesting. I've seen over the years some of the loudest voices against, I don't necessarily want to say the status quo because I'm not advocating for that, but against processes, then they get elected and they realize, oh, this is why things are done the way they are. And then they change their tune. And so, again, you're not, elected officials aren't on the dole. They're not getting kickbacks. Like, I mean, things that are like blatantly illegal. And as much as people want to say that, the media covers stuff up, okay, there are things that are just like media's not going to cover up like legitimate things. And so you look at and I wish, again, people paid attention but I wish, elected officials had a little more humility to be able to admit when they were wrong and say, yeah, I don't really answer that. And you know what? Yeah, it's a crappy situation, but that's the situation we're in. And we're trying to make the best decisions we can and show a little bit more of that, I don't know, humanness and relatability as opposed to always acting like they're the ones that are, altruistic or fighting for every decision they've ever made is right.
I feel like Mitt Romney really was good at that. And there were times when people called him a flip-flopper. And he would say, I have more information to make a better, refined decision. And yet people have long memories or short memories, depending on where it is. And they're not very forgiving.
They're not. Which is, again, our fault as constituency to not give grace to people. And, I mean, honestly, you saw that a lot during the COVID shutdowns, right? Is you had government that was not willing to come and say, guess what? Now I have new information. We're wrong. They just like dug their heels in, and then people lose credibility. And I think there's a lot of different facets of that have created a lot of lasting negative impacts when it comes to trusting institutions, which we need to have. And nothing's perfect. That's the thing is everyone thinks that the world or anything, like we have these things before. Nothing is ever perfect, but you do have to trust people at some point, and give people again the benefit of the doubt, give them grace that they want the same thing. We're all just doing the best we can.
Did you find, though, that you've worked with a lot of local leaders and a lot of state and federal. Do you feel like there was something that separated effective leaders versus ineffective leaders? Is there kind of a quality or something that you saw that was like, this is what makes somebody respected in their community?
Yeah, I think those that were willing to again meet people where they're at, and be fine explaining to them why they made decisions they did. I think, again, that, and compromise is a bad word, which is really funny to me because the very essence of our government was founded on compromise. We literally named them. And I think we create better legislation and better outcomes when we're willing to talk and find pros and cons and think of things in ways we hadn't thought about before. Again, not that you have to change your opinion, but it's like, yeah, that might be an unintended consequence of passing these decisions. And so, yeah, people that were willing to just talk with their constituents and didn't think that they were too big to have a conversation or have their reasoning questioned. That's where I think elected officials run into a problem is where when a resident comes and says, well, help me understand this, will they question something if the elected official thinks it because they have those 6 months of information, right, that they don't have to explain their reasoning to their residents. I think that's when you get into some problems.
It's interesting during any campaign season, you have a lot of newcomers to I would say, the landscape that throw out a lot of either accusations or ideas, and it's all part of the campaigning, right? And you've been through this for over a decade now. Are there things during the campaign season that you see kind of on a regular that you wish would be different as people are looking for who they're going to vote for?
I wish people understood the actual rules of the offices that they were electing. Like, it's just funny to me when, like county council members, like, oh, I'm gonna, stop abortion. It's like, literally, that's not your job, right? And so it's funny to me when they throw that stuff out, and that's what people care about because again, they can speak much easier to national issues than they can to their local issues of zoning or water use or taxes or anything else. And so that's what I wish people knew more of. And change just for the sake of change is not always better. And it seems to be there's a lot of that where they're just unhappy with the way things are at, and so they just vote everyone out. And so I wish there's a little more understanding literacy of our form of government and the roles of each entity and each position than there seems to be now.
And even drilling down to who's responsible for what at a local level. I found it sometimes heartbreaking when we would have people come to city council concerned about their property tax, and we would have to send them next door and say, that meeting is tomorrow. It's this time. We're so sorry that this is happening. And it happened all the time, that it wasn't just city issues versus county issues. People really didn't know where to go to for help. And yeah, I think it's so interesting.
Well, we get people all the time that would call us in DC that would want, it to vote against HB 42. And I'm like, that's the United States. That's in the Utah legislature. Where do you live? Here's your legislator. Like, call them.
Yeah. But it really is seeking for anyone to kind of see their point of view.
Well, that was the best part of working for federal delegation members is the part that isn't seen as the casework side. And that's where you have staff specifically that help people with a federal agency, whether it's they're not getting their social security checks or their passports are hung up or, immigration issues like that. Those were some of the most with veterans, right? Whether they had an issue getting their veterans benefits at a VA or they had lost their medals and they were trying to get new ones. And those are some of the more rewarding components with being able to help individuals. But those are the stories that rarely make the news.
Yeah, it's so true. Okay, I want to transition a little bit because you are now helping lead government relations for Utah 2034 Olympic and Paralympic Winter Games. How did you end up here? I'm a little jealous, I have to admit, but just talk to me how that became something that you had an opportunity to jump into that team.
So when Utah was working on its bid for the games, Fraser Bullock, who was Mitt's right hand during 2002, we worked with him to get some assurances from the federal government. Certain things like safe games and people will be able to come in, right? Certain things from governments that need to happen. And so I got to meet Fraser through that and thought, okay, well, when they get the games, it'll line up with potential when Mitt's done if he doesn't run for re-election. I was in 6th grade at Rocky Mountain Middle School when the games came through the first time. And I love the state of Utah. I love everything about Utahns. I love what we have to show the world. And I wanted to be part of representing Utahns on such a big scale and making sure that, all 29 counties were heard and it truly was a state event. And so anyway, I met with Fraser and kind of met with him biannually, quarterly, just kind of saying, okay, well, whenever the time's right, like I just want to be in mind. So when we got the bid, and then they kind of ramped some things up, and I was working for another company at the time, and he said, okay, you ready to join? I think it was earlier than I thought. It was earlier than he thought, but honored to be here. And it'll be, if I, don't get fired before the end, it'll be the longest time I've been in one spot.
Well, and it's so interesting. I remember the day that you started, you said, this is the one job that I have an end date.
Yeah.
And, something in 2034, but, you have a lot of work to do. One of the things I found interesting, having had some experience with working with Soldier Hollow and different Olympic opportunities, is the federal government offers two funding mechanisms for any Olympics: security, which you mentioned, and transportation. And that's it. I mean, basically, everything else is up to either the Olympic organizing organization or the USOC. So there's a lot of work to be done, especially fundraising, making sure that all facilities are up to international standards. I had an opportunity with Soldier Hollow. We walked some of the IOC delegates through, and even though we felt like we had made some significant upgrades with the $13 million technical building, they had lots of nitpicks that they went through and said, this needs to be fixed, this access, this won't work for the Paragames now. There are new requirements. I mean, how is that? How do you deal with that on a day-to-day basis, knowing that there is this looming deadline?
Yeah. Well, the deadline obviously helps because we always joke that government works better with a deadline, which you're right. The federal government itself only pays for, specifically to the Oregon's community, transportation. It's a bus share program, and then for security. But we will work with the state, and hopefully they'll be able to be prioritized on some roads and some infrastructure improvements there. But thanks to the legacy of 2002, we do have, venues. So it is only nitpicky things. We're not having to build brand new venues, which is so great and such a benefit. And so we'll work. There's a few things that if there needs to be upgrades specifically for the Olympics, the organizing committee has some money for that. We'll work with the venues. But the state obviously keeps the venues up, and the Olympic Legacy Foundation has their own funding. But yeah, we're funded privately through donations until 28 is over, the LA Games, and then commercial opportunities will be open to us. But so yeah, it's a lot of trying to say, okay, what does the exact landscape look like? How can we help benefit again the whole state? What are some upgrades that we need to make as a whole, and how can the state be better? One of the misconceptions is that we're somehow a government agency or an entity of the state, and we are not. We are a private 501c3, and our main responsibility is to put on the games. All the other stuff we're going to do are extra and help elevate the community, which we care so much about. But we're just putting on a really long event, which you know well from event planning, and it's just kind of a big one. But again, so we have to go say to the state, like, we can't ask them to do anything. We're not telling them to do anything. They work within their own parameters, but it's how can we partner and work together to catalyze and use something, a big worldwide event for 17-ish days.
And then Paragames.
Yeah. So I was trying to think. So they have 17 days of the Olympics and then 10 days of the Paralympics. So
no, I didn't realize until recently how important the designation of Utah 2034 Olympics. And I thought about my experience in 2002 when it was the Salt Lake Olympics, and yet we had Park City and Ogden, Provo Ice Sheet here in the Heber Valley at Soldier Hollow. Why was it important that they designated it Utah 2034?
Well, I think there were a few reasons. And if you go back, that started way back in 2019 when the state was first talking about the games. And Governor Herbert at the time, who was a Utah County Commissioner in 2002, was like, we want this to be bigger, right? Because Provo has an Olympic venue. And I think, there's a few things you can get the technicalities of the IOC has allowed for regions to be able to host games, which allowed the state of Utah to be the signer and the guarantor. 2002 was just a different world when it came to the games, and who wanted it, who didn't. But I think for now, all those places you mentioned, we have grown up as a state. And you think of all of our venue cities, right? West Valley has its own brand, and that's where the Maverick Center is going to have figure skating and speed skating. Kearns in the Oval, right, is known now, world renowned for the Olympic Oval and short track. You've got obviously Provo that's got their own brand. Wasatch County in the Heber Valley, we have our own brand, in Perth City, and all these places have kind of grown up. And so the ability to show that off, and again to have all of Utah be represented, and we truly do want it to, everyone from all 29 counties to have the opportunity to engage and have there be some sort of benefit and opportunity again, so that the state now, we've got I think 7 years, 8 months runway to say, what do we want to be like? What do all our communities want to be like? Whether you have a host community or not. And I joke with audiences. You heard me say it a couple weeks ago that You've got, 7.5 years to figure out who you want to be in 2034, right? We've got 92 countries that participate in the Winter Games, either relearn a language that you learned in your early 20s or learn a new one to be able to say, this is who I want to be and the role I want to play to welcome the world. And one of the things that I remember, which everyone, visually is the pins that said, I speak whatever language, which I think was awesome and spectacular and took the world, I think, a little by surprise that we have so many languages spoken here in Utah. I mean, I've seen anywhere from 130 to 140 different languages spoken across the state. And I want that to only elevate and be that much more of an amazing opportunity for us in 34.
I was also surprised how much bigger 2034 will be compared to 2002. And that is that just because there's more games, there's more sports, there's more athletes? Why is it just bigger overall?
More athletes, more kind of different disciplines within the sport, right? There's a lot of mixed relays. There's more women's sports. I mean, like, for example, you've got luge, which not only has, singles and they have doubles, then you have mixed relays. There's mass starts, there's time start, like there's all these different kind of variations within each sport specifically. And we'll probably have a fairly new sport in 34, ski mountaineering, which is debuted in Italy in this last February. And from what I hear, will continue in the French Alps. And
watching that, those are like the extreme alpine athletes.
Yeah.
To climb the mountain, turn around and ski down it.
And then they do it again on like the relay.
Yeah.
It's just crazy to me. So, you got more snowboarding, you got more aerials, you got more of the big stuff. One of the big ones that'll be new that we'll have in downtown Salt Lake, which would be pretty cool, is Big Air, which is a whole temporary massive jump. So that'll be pretty cool to have in kind of an urban setting up amongst all the high rises and
skyscrapers.
Yes. So anyway, it'll be fun.
So one of the things that I've been dying to ask you, because you are a Wasatch County girl, you ride horses, you're very much about open space. But now you work for the Olympics, which a lot of people blame 2002 for the growth that we've seen here in the Heber Valley. So what's kind of your take on how do you balance growth with tourism, economic opportunities, and that quality of life that we so desperately want to preserve?
Yeah. I always joke that come visit, just don't move here, right? So come spend all your tourism dollars and then leave. I think as I wrestle with this, honestly, I think as we've seen, I think probably honestly 2020 and COVID had more of a direct correlation on growth and rapidity than I think 2002 did from the Olympics. But in my mind, again, it's all coming. And we see issues. Our concerns from a transportation perspective are the same concerns that everyone has every day, right? The same lynch points, the same bottlenecks. And I hope that this go around, the Olympics can be used to alleviate some of those concerns so that we can think and help the state think bigger, right? And have a deadline to get certain things done, like Kimmel Junction or the intersection of Highway 40 and 80, which has backup all the time. And, so those are things that we're looking at that hopefully we can say, hey, this helps us move people, but the state is well aware of those issues and can help move that out of the priority list, maybe get some extra funding from the feds earlier to get those things done quicker. And so hopefully it helps alleviate that, and there's benefits that come as a whole. So
it's been fun to kind of research your career and see the pathway and the opportunities that you've had. Is there any advice that you would give to a young person that's considering a career in government or public service?
Yeah, get involved. Again, it's super cool. We have elections are going on right now, especially on the state level, on county. Like, there is not you can speak to this, not a person who's ever run a campaign that would say no to volunteers. And some of the coolest experiences I had that I learned the most was helping work on a state legislator race out in Taylorsville, because he'd done campaigns every 2 years for like 12 years. So he had it down. He just needed some of the manpower and the elbow grease. And so to learn from him the best sign placements and how to use the information and what doors to knock in a primary and how it works. And I ran a couple sheriff's races and some mayors. And again, people are so accessible that you have to do a bunch of those different things. And that's where you're going to get the most well-rounded. So that's what I tell everyone who wants to know is get involved on a state legislative race, get, involved in your county council, and you get to know like officials super well. You get to know the process super hands-on, and it's not everyone wants to volunteer for the big flashy ones, but you're never going to get as much access and as much experience on those ones as you do the nitty-gritty of a local race.
So true. Okay, if there's one issue that Utah needs to start talking about now that's going to define the next generation, and I was thinking you're 20 years younger than me. Like, what is an issue that really is for top of mind for you that I'm probably not even thinking about?
That's a good question. I don't know if I'm the right person to ask. I'm an old soul. I don't know. I look and I think obviously we have housing affordability issues. That's no question in my mind. But I do worry that sometimes too many decisions are made on a short term basis as opposed to trying to do long term. Like I get that supply and demand and hopefully brings things down, cost down, everything else. But are there certain decisions that we're making that 20 years from now I'll be like, great, that wasn't the best way to do that housing development, or this didn't age very well, but because we're so focused on right now. And I think that's in general. We talked about this when I worked for Mitt, is how do you help people look past, we were talking about, business, but how do you make them look past, the next quarter and the next report? And I hope that legislators and elected officials are thinking that way. But that takes some courage, honestly. It takes courage to say, look, this might not be popular now, but it'll be the better thing in the long run. So anyway, that's something that worries me. And I think it goes into everything, right? Attack housing affordability, but transportation. We get so kind of focused on the bubble that we don't look far down the road and say, are we going to regret this? And learn from the cliche of those who don't know history are doomed to repeat it. And so do we learn enough from the past? Do we look forward? Or I think there's so many things coming our way that we just get super tunnel vision. So,
at the end of the day, beyond the headlines and the politics, what does it mean to be a good citizen for you?
I think to know about your community, get to know your neighbors, get off social media and actually go have a conversation with someone. We joke about touching grass, but that's I think one of the bigger issues from COVID is we lost a lot of that, and especially in a community like Wasatch County. I'm nervous. We were super lucky in the fact that we had one high school, and so you could know everyone. Folks that lived out in Center Creek knew everyone that lived in Midway or Wallsburg or vice versa, right? And it felt, even though we've grown, it still felt like a super small town. And now that we have two high schools, I'm really worried about what that does to Wasatch County and making it, the place that we all knew and loved. And so I'm super nervous about that. So I hope people still engage and, again, get to know your neighbors and have, potlucks and neighborhood parties. And that's where I think things will really change and heal and have some of that.
Sure. It's that face-to-face connection. Yeah. As we wrap up, is there anything that, we haven't covered that you're just dying to share about the Olympics or just working at the federal level?
No, I love this county. I think it's super special. I think Utah in general is super special. And I want to make sure that we don't lose that because we get sucked into, the fights on social media and the outside world and become too much like everywhere else. So I'm really excited to show off Utah and our hospitality to the world. And what makes Utah so special. That's what I think made 2002 so remarkable is its people. And so I'm really excited to show that off. And I hope we hold tight to what makes us unique.
One of the programs that I hope to participate in is the welcoming families of the athletes. I've heard you speak to this before, that some of these athletes don't know they're coming to the Olympics until 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks prior to, and not all those families are wealthy. In fact, most aren't, because they have put everything into that athlete. So I really love that Utah has started basically adopt a family program where they're encouraging Utahns to open their homes for athlete families to come and stay. And obviously the hotels are going to be booked out well in advance with media and sponsors and such. But if we can really show our hospitality from a local, open your home, and have an athlete's family stay with you, I just think that would be one of the best things that we can do.
Yeah.
I hope people will take advantage of that.
We do too, and we don't quite know what the program will look like yet, but we do hope that folks will, and we have zero doubt that utahns will step up and help out and show, again, the state of families. That's what we are in the state of Utah, and so we want to welcome everyone. So yeah, we're really excited about that too.
And of course, volunteering opportunities. You don't have to wait till 2034, especially here in the Heber Valley. Soldier Hollow is always looking for volunteers. We've got the International Mountain Biking event happening this fall that's, I know Luke Bodensteiner would be happy to put people to work, but there really are opportunities almost monthly that people can get involved, whether it's Ogden with the marathon, curling events. We've got really cool events at Soldier Hollow plus Park City. So again, now's the time to sharpen our skills, whether it's language or technical skills. If you have a sport that you love, become a volunteer so that you can be on the technical side. I think you get some perks with that. Warming stations. My experience in 2002 as a runt that was pushing snow and changing out garbage cans is there weren't a lot of warming stations. So that might be something to think about.
Good to know.
Kelsey, you have had an amazing career and it's not over, and I'm excited to see what you're going to do with the Utah 2034 team.
Thank you very much. Happy to have been honored or invited to come sit with you. So
yeah,
appreciate it, Rachel.
So just as we're talking, whether it's Washington, Salt Lake City, or right here in the Heber Valley, the challenges that we face are best solved when good people are willing to listen, engage respectfully, and stay involved with the communities. So I really do appreciate you sharing your experiences and your perspective and your optimism for Utah's future. We really do wish you the best with preparing for the 2034 Olympic and Paralympic Winter Games. It really is an opportunity for Utah to shine. And I think you're the right person to make those government connections and make sure we are ready. And that's going to happen. So I just want to thank our listeners for joining us on Heber Valley Life. We are wrapping up season 2 and taking the summer off. But if you've enjoyed today's conversation, please subscribe, share this episode with a friend, and continue to be part of the conversations that are strengthening our community. So until next time, I'm Rachel Kahler, and this is Heber Valley Life.